All right, so now we want to add the functionality to be able to delete these ideas, but we only want to be able to delete them or even see the delete button if we are logged in with this username, or not logged in, but if we have that username in local storage. All right, so let's start off with our ideas API service because we need a couple methods, one to delete, and then I'm also going to add one to update. Even though we're not adding update functionality in the UI in the front end, I still want to have a method in case you guys want to add it or whatever. So let's add an update idea, and that's going to take in the ID so we know which one to update, and then the data, and then we're just going to return axios.put. Okay, it would be a put request, and then the URL, let's put some backticks in here, and we would say this._API URL, and then slash whatever the ID passed in, and then the second argument to the put method would be the data. All right, and then for the delete, say delete idea. So that's just going to take in an ID. Now we do want to send the username because remember it has to match the one of the idea. So let's say const username, and what we'll do is set this to, let's say, local storage.get item, and we want to make sure that it's there. So we'll say get item username. So if that's there, then we're going to use that. So once again, get item username, else, then it'll just be an empty string. And then we're going to return axios.delete. And in delete, we want to do the same thing. We need to have the URL, so this API URL, and then slash whatever the ID. And then for the data, we're just passing the username. So let's create our object here and then set data to an object that just has the username. Okay, so this is basically the same as doing this. I'm just taking off the second one. And that should do the delete on the server. Now let's go to our idea list, because what we have to do is have an event listener on the button here to be able to delete. So let's start off by creating an add event listeners method because we don't have one here yet. And we're going to do event delegation here where we put the click event on the entire list, but then we target the icon, which I believe has a class of fa-times. So let's say this underscore idea list element, and we're going to add an event listener onto that. We're going to listen for a click, and then we're going to have a function take in the event object, and then we want to target that times button, that delete icon. So to do that, we'll say e.target, which is the whatever we click on, and we'll see if the class list contains the class of fa-times. That's the delete button. Now I only want this to happen if we click the times. I don't want it to propagate up. So what I'll do is just put in stop immediate propagation. And then we're going to need the ID. So the way we can get that, and I probably should have just did this earlier, is I'm going to put the ID in a custom attribute on the card, on the div here. So we can easily do that by just saying data-id. Okay, when we add a custom attribute, it should be a data attribute. And then we're already getting, we're going through the ideas, and we get each idea with all the fields. So we can just put in here idea dot and then underscore ID. And we're putting underscore ID because that's how MongoDB adds it into the database. If we look at Compass, you can see that these all have a field of underscore ID. So that's what we want to get, and we want to put it in the card. So if I save that and I go to my Elements tab, and we take a look at one of these cards, now you can see that there's a data ID attribute with that ID. So now we want to be able to get that up here. So in our event listener, let's continue on here and let's create a variable called idea ID. And I'm going to set that to e.target. Now that's the button that we, or the icon that we click on. So I want to get the parent element from that. And if we look at down here at the HTML, the parent of this icon is actually a button with the class of delete. We technically don't even need this button here, but I'll just keep it there. But we want the parent of that because that's where this data ID is. So we can just add parent element again. So that'll be the actual card. And I want to get the data ID attribute, so we can say data set. Whenever you have a data ID, you can get it with data set, and then whatever the name of the attribute, in this case ID. So that should get it. And then let's just do a console log here of idea ID. Now add event listeners isn't running, so we're gonna not put it in the constructor. Since we're rendering our HTML, we want to put it down here because we don't want it to run before the HTML renders. So let's say this dot add event listeners. And now if I come over here and I open up my console and then we click on one of these, you'll see that now it's logging the ID. So we just need that to be able to delete. And there's two things we need to do. We need to delete from the server through our API class. We also need to remove it from the DOM. So let's have a method in here called delete idea. So we'll say delete idea, and then we'll create that. Let's go under the get ideas and say delete idea, and that's going to take in idea ID. I feel like I'm saying a tongue twister. And then we're going to do a try catch, and we want to first, let's say, delete from server. We're going to do that through our API class method. So let's say const res, and we actually want to make this asynchronous because Axios returns a promise. So let's say await on the ideas API dot delete idea, and we're going to pass in the ID. So that will delete from the server. Now we want to delete it from the DOM, so what I'm going to do is filter it out. So we can do that by taking this dot ideas. Okay, that's our array that holds all the ideas, and we're going to filter that. So we'll say filter, and that's going to take in a function, and we'll say for each idea, and we're going to return, let's say, idea dot underscore ID. We want to say if that is not equal to the ID that's being passed in. All right, so it'll filter, it'll basically give us all but the one that we deleted. And then after that, we just want to get the ideas again. So I'm going to call this dot get ideas, which would be this. It's just going to get them and it's going to re-render. And then if there's an error, that's going to be because we can't delete it because the username doesn't match. So we're just going to say you cannot delete this resource. All right, and that should do it. So let's come over here, and if I click on one of these, actually let's see what's happening here. Delete idea is not defined. Oh, in the add event listeners, we have to do this dot delete idea. And there we go. So we get our 403 response, because that's what we set up in the back end, and we see you cannot delete this resource. I can't delete this one either because I don't own these, right? My username in local storage is Brad, and these are not. So let's add a new one with whatever your username is. Let's say this is a test, and we'll say business, submit. And now if I go to delete that, I can. All right. Now I'd like to make it so we don't even see these X marks if that's not our idea. So that's actually pretty easy to do. We're just going to go in the list and down to where we're rendering. And then where we have the button, so right here, I'm actually going to cut that. And I'm going to output here instead a variable of delete btn, which is going to be a conditional button. So let's go within the map right below where we have tag class, and we'll say const delete btn, and we're going to set that to say idea dot and then username. So if the idea username matches what we have in local storage, so get item and username. So if that matches, then we want to show the button. So I'll just paste that in here. And else, yeah, let's say else, then it'll just be an empty string. So now there's no button showing here. But if I create another listing, now it is, because my ID matches this. If I reload, it should stay there, and I should be able to delete that. Now let's remove the name from local storage and make sure that everything is still okay. So if we go to application, this is it right here. I'm just going to delete that. And we'll keep the console open here. Let's reload. All right, so if we don't have a username, obviously we don't see the delete button. We can't do anything. If I go to create, let's use something different. We'll use Jane Doe. Just say hello, business. And this, again, this down here, this error is because of LastPass. So now we created this new post by Jane Doe, who is basically what we're logged in as, for lack of a better word, and then we can delete. All right, so that's it. We have created a full stack application with a back end using Express and MongoDB, and our front end, which is just vanilla JavaScript using a module bundler using Webpack. And I tried to structure everything as we would in like a real life project. We're not using a framework, but I still tried to use UI components and services for our API. If you want to add on to this, that's fine. I would actually suggest that you try to add on to this just for learning purposes. Now, in the next video, we'll talk a little bit about deployment for a full stack app.